All right, so let's go ahead and, just one second here. Let's go ahead and use the quantifier negation rules in doing a proof, right? So we're going to use the quantifier negation rules. We're going to be using the rules for removing and introducing quantifiers that we looked at in 7.2. And we'll be using the 18 rules from Chapter 6 as well. So putting them all together here in proofs from Section 7.3. And so just as always, when we're doing these proofs, you're going to look at your conclusion first, find it in the premises. So there's our, predicate here, A. The predicate is found there in the first premise as well. So we know it's in there. It'll come out of there somehow. We're going to, first of all, though, look at, can we use lines 1 and 2 together? So just as your motivation in Chapter 6 in doing proofs is to always ask yourself, can you use one of the rules of inference, right, the first 8 rules, to do something here with your premises? You have that same motivation here in Chapter 7. In other words, is there a modus ponens sitting here? Is there something else? So looking at this one, of course, we have a wedge as the main operator in our first premise. And so modus ponens is not a good candidate. However, when the wedge is the main operator of a premise, we should consider using disjunctive syllogism. Now, disjunctive syllogism will work if we have the negation of one of our 2 disjuncts here. And so we have for all x bx, and here's the bx here. So one thing we can remember is that disjunctive syllogism has p wedge q, and then you need to have tilde p. So in other words, this would have to be on the other side to be able to start working toward a disjunctive syllogism. And so we can use commutativity on 1 to flip it and make it the way we want it to, right? So we're just flipping that around the wedge, just like we did in Chapter 6, okay, to put that over there, because now we're closer to a disjunctive syllogism. We have p wedge q, and this is almost tilde p. Of course, it isn't quite, and so we have to ask ourselves, well, how can we maybe maneuver this into looking like that, or vice versa? So what can we do? Well, we know we need to change a quantifier here, right? We have different quantifiers associated with this B predicate. And so we learned about, of course, in the last video, the quantifier negation rules, which will change quantifiers for us. So we simply have to ask ourselves, would we rather change this quantifier into that one or vice versa? In the end, it usually doesn't matter all that much. It might save you one step here or there in the end. But just to show you how, in fact, the quantifier negation rules do work on parts of lines, I'm going to go ahead and change this quantifier into the universal quantifier. And so what that means is when you do quantifier negation rules, you simply move the tilde to the other side of the quantifier, thus changing the quantifier. And then, of course, since we're just using quantifier negation rules on a part of a line, everything else will carry down the same there, right? Okay, so now we have our quantifiers matching. But of course, we want to do a disjunctive syllogism, and so we need to have the negation of that left-hand side to be able to pull this off. Well, that means we have to have 2 tildes in front of this one, which we can do with double negation there. And so now I hope you can see, right, what we're looking at here. The pieces are quite big, we might say, but that's P wedge Q, right? P wedge Q. Can't see that very well. And then down here we have tilde P. We have P wedge Q and tilde P. That means we can do disjunctive syllogism, giving us this other piece, right? So my whole motivation here is what can I do with these 2 premises? And since the wedge is the main operator there, I'm thinking, well, disjunctive syllogism is a good option. So I'm going to try that, and I did, and I got this. After we use basically the information there in our premises, I'm going to go back and check my conclusion to see how I'm going to get there, right? And now the good news is I've got my A predicate by itself. All I need to do, of course, comparing the conclusion to number 6, is change the quantifier. And we can do that by simply moving the tilde We just move the tilde to the other side, and it changes the quantifier every time. And of course, that matches our conclusion, and so we're done with this one. All right? So I do want to note here that in this particular problem, it's a little bit unusual because we never actually pulled off any of the quantifiers here from our premises. And that can happen sometimes. We just needed to use the quantifier negation rules, of course, along with a couple of the other rules from Chapter 6. Also, just note here that we couldn't pull off the quantifiers from line 1. We could never have pulled off the quantifiers from line number 1 because the main operator of line number 1 is the wedge and not the quantifier. So that means it's stuck on there, in other words. Okay? But that's how we got to our conclusion. And so we'll practice this a few times, do a few more proofs using all of these rules together, so you get a sense as to how this will work.